Hello, everybody. Thank you for staying around until the end. And thank you for the opportunity to speak on the topic of healthcare apps, hemophilia apps. I have nothing to declare in this respect. And starting off with a short agenda, I'll give you a short or general overview on the topic of healthcare apps, hemophilia apps, make some comments. Then I'll demonstrate some of the apps that I reviewed and close with a short conclusion and outlook. But first of all, I'd like to start with a couple of questions to wake you up. First question here is, how many of you own a smartphone or tablet computer? Can you please raise your hands? Okay, so I guess that's almost everybody in the room. Second question, how many of you have used a smartphone app focused on hemophilia care? Okay, still quite a lot. And how many of you think smartphone and tablet apps will provide a major improvement to hemophilia care in the future? Okay, to summarize, all of you own a smartphone or tablet and think that apps are of any use, and some have used them already. So overall, the whole field of smartphone and healthcare apps has been a huge field of innovation in the past. In 2015, we counted 1.8 billion smartphone users worldwide, using 103,000 healthcare apps, which were downloaded approximately 3 billion times. So these are huge numbers. Still, great expectations, but what apps can do and what they can't is rather not dependent on the devices that you use the apps on and the infrastructures like internet and mobile phone networks. In the best way, smartphone apps for hemophilia could be a technical implementation of what we call individualized medicine. And also in remote areas or under limited resources, telemedicine could improve hemophilia care. So in the real world, most apps that I reviewed for today were customized for one country, meaning that there was a reduced availability, also due to the lack of translation to different languages. Most of the apps were in English. In general, there were more Android apps than Apple apps, about the double. And not all features that from the apps that I reviewed were available all the time in every situation. And sometimes the applications just didn't run stable. So I have a personal disclaimer here to make as well. Not all of the apps that you might know were accessible for me during preparing this talk. Actually, I think most were not. It was about a dozen of apps that I had access to. So I could only review the apps, of course, that I had access to, only review the apps in English and German, German being my first language, obviously. I used Android and Apple apps, but obviously I don't use both systems, so there might be a possible bias, but I tried a workaround for the system I don't use. And my talk might be a little bit off topic, meaning that apps can be useful in a lot of ways, but in reality, we are still not there yet in many cases. So, starting off with hemophilia apps, to give you a short overview, there are basically three fields of hemophilia care where the smartphone applications can be useful. It's treatment and therapy, information and education, and networking and advocacy. As you see, these three circles are obviously overlapping, so most of the applications that I found shared features from different fields. And starting off with treatment and therapy, this is probably the classic hemophilia app that you have in mind, these apps. And again, I tried to start with a short schematic overview by functions of different apps, which functions different apps would provide. The first one would be the classic patient diary or treatment log. Second one would be adherence tool. Adherence tools, interactive treatment tools is another field, and individualized prophylaxis tool is still a bit further. As you see again, all of these four different types are interconnected and there's always different features that the real apps that I reviewed would share. between these different fields. So the first one, patient diaries and treatment logs. These are basically tools that would give you give the patient the opportunity to document bleedings and injections, bleeding events. Most of them would provide the opportunity of visualization and analysis of the data that you would put into them. Also, most of these apps would provide the opportunity, a possibility to document quality of life in some way, also over a period of time. And some, but really not a lot of applications, also gave the opportunity of ordering treatment products to the patients via the apps. A downer on this in these applications is obviously a data security issue, like the question who makes use of the data that I put into the app or that I provide via the app. Adherence tools is a very, most of them are very, very much related to treatment logs or patient diaries. These are basically reminders on your phone or via email to inject the factor according to the scheduled treatment regimen. And some also provide a reminder to visit your healthcare center or a hemophilia treatment center. And downer in this section of applications is obviously maturity issues, or what I would call maturity issues. It's basically applications that would go for an outsourcing of medical decisions. So we must be sure for that it's, of course, it's a help. It's implementing adherence tools, reminders that for the patients to help them to follow the treatment regimens. But it's also an outsourcing to a technical device that is as good as it is. Interactive treatment tools is another sort of apps that I found. It's basically the function, gives you functions to communicate with your doctor, or gives the patient the opportunity to communicate with his doctor or with his hemophilia treatment center. And in the best way could provide an opportunity of real-time documentation of infusions and bleedings. And the data that would be provided might be linked to a bigger database, identifying emergencies and giving notifications of an emergency in the best ways, or even might be linked to a quality of product database. But as you see, these last points, these 2 points, in most applications that I had access to were not reality. It's some of these points are still science fictions in some way. And of course, there's always a privacy and responsibility issue here as well. Also, regarding the point of emergencies, there's always the question if a patient has an emergency and would indicate an emergency via his app, who is responsible for reacting? Even as we've heard before, if there's a doctor on leave, or even in Austria, we have a situation that telemedicine services are not reimbursed by the public healthcare system. So it's not clear yet if the time that the doctors spend to use these apps is even part of their working time, actually. And the fourth section here is individualized prophylaxis tools. This is still a bit further into the future, a little bit of science fiction yet to come. It's basically tools working with pharmacokinetic data, calculating the current factor level that is in the patient's bloodstream, starting with the last infusion. And some might even relate in the future to the physical activity level of the patient and predict risk of bleeding and time to the next infusion in this way. And there's obviously liability issues here. These apps are only as good as the scientific models underlying. So starting with the first app that I would like to show you today, it's called MicroHealth. It's probably the most successful healthcare app in hemophilia today. It gives the patient the opportunity to document and schedule infusions via this calendar section here that you see. Set reminders via the phone, on the phone or via email. You can also email the treatment log, to yourself or to your doctor that you could connect to. You can contact your hemophilia treatment center via the app and connect with other users. So you see here, this is already a combination of the 4 different treatment apps that I showed you before. And it's probably the classic hemophilia treatment app. You also have the opportunity to document bleeding events here, as you see, with photos and treatment that you used responding to bleeding. And the issue I addressed earlier, and also as Gary addressed in his lecture, privacy. This is an app that was developed by an independent developer company, which is free of charge for download and for use. Also internationally, so I found it in Austria, you might find it in the US or wherever you live. There's no direct link to any pharmaceutical company. So it's not an app that was sponsored by any pharmaceutical company, and the data privacy statement is very transparent. As you see here, it says we do not sell your personal information to anyone for direct marketing purposes without your explicit consent, period. So this is quite a statement. Nevertheless, it's sensitive data that the patients would put into these apps or make available via these apps, this app. So, and this data might later on be used for commercial purposes. MyFactor is another app that I would like to show you. It's very similar to MicroHealth, developed by a US pharmacy and home infusion service provider. And some features might be more intuitive, as you see here, the locations of the bleeding events that you could indicate on the body, and it's got a very nice reporting and analysis tool here. You see, these apps are most of them are only the ones that I found available in the US or in North America. Most of them are not available in my country, so I cannot review them in detail, but you see, it's quite a lot of them, and they all work with the same idea or the same principle, as I pointed out earlier. So one statement that I would like to make here is really sometimes it's an invention of, or it's a situation of reinventing the wheel over and over again. And of course, in our community, it's also an issue of resources, of the qualified or a good use of resources. So interactive treatment and individualized flow access tools, I will go over this a bit shorter. It's basically dosing tools customized for specific products, following an average pharmacokinetics. And this is an app that will be coming in the future, and in about November, I heard today. It's the MyPKFit patient app that will be released. And it has a very sound predictive model of an individualized pharmacokinetics starting from 2 blood samples of a patient and giving the opportunity of adapting the treatment regimen to a specific situation as physical activity. And the downside of it, it's obviously just customized for one specific product. So if you're not using one product, this specific product, it doesn't work. And this is another app that I would like to show you today. It's a very nice app developed by HFA. It's called BloodSisterhood and is an app for women and girls with bleeding disorders, giving them the opportunity of documenting menstrual bleedings with date, severity, and treatment. Also predicting the bleeding events, giving reminders of the monthly periods. And it's got a very fine-tuned symptoms and treatment record, and I think this is really a win-win situation here. It's an excellent way of increasing the awareness for women with bleeding disorders, with doctors and medical staff, but also with the patients themselves. So information and education, I go over this a bit shorter. It's basically apps focusing on understanding of bleeding disorders, management of bleeding, like adjuvant treatment as well, access to treatment, and physical health. And the first app I'd like to show is FactorMap. It's a German app giving you basically a registry of hemophilia treatment center connected to your map on your smartphone, giving all the contact details and also the opportunity or the possibility of an emergency call. And also provide some general information about bleeding disorders. HemTravel is an app that has been released quite recently. It's focusing more on the issues of traveling with the bleeding disorders, Also provides the maps of the hemophilia treatment centers in the countries that you would travel to, and providing contact information and some useful information for traveling, like the vaccinations you would have to take, the medication that you should take along. And the third section here is networking and advocacy. I'll also go on over this a bit briefly. It's basically apps focusing on awareness and fundraising. These are apps, probably most of them are designed by NMOs, by hemophilia organizations, focusing on awareness and fundraising, the meetings, programs, and activities of the NMOs, and connecting their members. And here again, a very nice example is gettinggear. It's an app that also tries to combine different features, tracking physical activity of the person who uses it with time and distance. It gives you a reminder to get physically active. All of these activities you see here are hemophilia friendly, like walking, running, swimming, bicycling. And it's also a way to raise money and awareness for hemophilia or for bleeding disorders, as the data that the users put into it were then later on used to raise money or funds for the Hemophilia Society. So this is also a win-win situation here. And just to conclude what I showed you today, in the best way, hemophilia treatment or hemophilia apps could be a way to implement individualized care, document your symptoms and treatment, and raise adherence to the therapy with the patients. It could be the possibility of quality management of therapy, products, and quality of life, and collect data for further research, and also provide access to information and treatment under certain circumstances. Thank you.